Comfort is key in endurance sports, and as triathletes, we spend the majority of our time cycling. Therefore, it is worth investing a bit of time in finding that perfect, comfortable position on your bike. And the best place to start? Yeah, you guessed it, it's here. Today, we are going to be looking at how to find that optimum saddle height. First up, you need to make sure you've got the correct bike frame size. I'm hoping you're at that stage already, but the next thing to address is the saddle height. And you need to be patient here because it's going to take a little bit of time in tweaking and finding that perfect height, but it's worth it in the long run. Once you've got there, you will be able to have endless hours of comfortable riding. And it can be tempting to start adjusting other areas first if you feel discomfort in other parts of your body, but a lot of it will stem from the saddle. So it's always a good idea to start here. All right, I'm going to begin with the basic technique, which is at least going to give you a starting point to work from there. So if you do have a turbo or something similar to put your bike in for stability, that's great. If not, don't worry, you can simply use a wall or a sofa, just something you can hold on to whilst you're trying this out. So you want to start by sitting on your bike, with your bike shoes on preferably, and then placing your heel on your pedal. Before you move anything, I want you to just make sure that your pelvis is nice and level, and then take your leg down to 6 o'clock on the crank. So basically you have the crank right down to the bottom, and in that position the ideal position for your knee is to be completely straight. If when you use both sets, so you can start to pedal backwards if you're in this position. If you're on a turbo, you can obviously pedal forwards, and you should find if it's right, you're not going to be swaying side to side. If you're swaying or you're struggling to reach on the other side, then that means your saddle height is too high. If you're having a bent knee, that means your saddle height is too low. So once you've found that straight knee position, it's time to clip in. Now, putting in your clips is obviously going to add a little bit of height, so hopefully when your leg is at the bottom you will have a slight bend in the knee. All right, then it's time to head outside, because what might seem perfect whilst you're just tweaking and playing around at home, after 30 minutes out on the road in a real life scenario can feel very different. So obviously feel comes into a part of it. You know what you should feel like and whether it's comfortable or not, but also if you've got a friend who normally rides with you and they know what you look like on your bike, or maybe someone who's got more of an expert eye to take a look at how you actually seem on the saddle. And if not, try it on a turbo at home. You can even film yourself, and if you do, it's quite a good idea to do different angles, but if you do film from behind, that will give you a really good idea of how your pelvis is moving as well. So once you're out on the road, what are the signs that your saddle is too high? Well, we've touched on the first one, and that is excessive movement at the pelvis. So basically, if you're having to stretch to reach the pedal, you're going to be rotating side to side. So that would be a fairly obvious movement. You can see it's sort of like a rocking motion, and that then has a knock-on effect to your torso and your lower back, and you might even see your whole body snaking. So if you do spot someone like that, that's probably what's going on there. And obviously you're going to be less efficient, and you're not going to be able to put as much power down if you're in that position. Another sign could be actually at the ankle. If you've got excessively pointed toes when you're at the bottom of the stroke, this is going to put more strain on the calves, as well as obviously taking out some power. Now, it is worth noting though, this is compared to what your normal is, because some people do have a pedal stroke that's much more pointed than say others who like to have more than 90 degrees at their ankle. So bear that in mind when you're assessing yourself or if you're helping anybody else. And then finally, it's probably too late if this is the scenario, but if your saddle is excessively high, you're going to struggle to touch the ground when you come to a stop. But yeah, like I said, it's probably too late. And then we've got the signs that your saddle is too low. And for this, you want to look towards your hips and your knees. So at the knee, you're going to see excessive flexion. So obviously at the top of the pedal stroke, you're going to see the knee really close, that joint there. And then at the bottom of the pedal stroke, you're still going to see a notable bend in the knee, more than you should. And as for the hips, again, excessive flexion, especially at the top of the pedal stroke, where it's going to feel like your thighs are pretty much touching your stomach and you're getting limited by that. Well, obviously it's an inefficient way of pedaling, but it can also lead to knee pain because you're pinching those joints and you're putting extra strain through those areas. Right, you found that perfect saddle height, so how do you make sure you don't lose it? Well, you need to record it, obviously. If it's your own bike, you could simply put a piece of tape where it is, or maybe even count the measurements and record that actually on the seat post itself. Or you could take a measurement that you can then carry over to other bikes that are obviously of a similar shape and dimension. So for that, you need to measure from the center of the bottom bracket up to the top of the saddle. And it can be a little bit tricky with a tape measure. Sometimes it's easier to use a piece of string and then simply compare that onto a tape measure and record it that way. Now, if you don't yet have a bike and you don't know your optimum saddle height, but maybe you're submitting your figures for a bike fit and they need to know, then you can get a good estimation from measuring yourself or your legs. So you want to measure from your crotch down to the floor and then calculate 90% of that, and that should give you roughly the right height for your saddle. Beyond the basics, there are so many other factors that can affect finding that perfect saddle height. And if you've been riding for a while, then you're going to know whether it feels right or not. And one thing that is amazing is how such a tiny adjustment can make a really significant difference. So once you're close, whether you've used that basic setup method to start, then you just want to tweak the saddle height up and down by as little as 1 or 2 millimeters, and you'll be amazed at how you will actually notice that difference. I'm sure you've noticed I have swapped my bikes over. That is because the type of bike will affect your saddle height as well. So if you took a road bike as the norm, sort of middle ground, then you'd want to lower your saddle height for riding a mountain bike so you can maneuver yourself and find comfort on that style of bike. And it's the other end of the spectrum for the TT bike. You'd want to raise your saddle. But I'll come more onto why in a moment. And talking of saddles, the saddle type can have an effect. If imagine you've got a really soft squidgy saddle, then it's going to give a false measurement if you're just measuring to the top of it. And even the type of saddle can change and affect your position. It's not as simple as purely the saddle height. It's the position of the saddle on your bike. So you can adjust your saddle fore and aft. So by simply loosening the clamps here and moving those rails forwards or backwards. The further forward you have your saddle, the higher you want to have it, and vice versa. And then also the amount of tilt. So some people do have a bit of a tilt, forward tilt on their saddle. Again, you want that a bit higher. That's more often seen on TT bikes. Basically, on a TT bike, everything is moved forward. So you can see the saddle is much closer to being over the top of the bottom bracket. You're also going to have your pelvis much more anteriorly rotated due to the position you're in, so there'll be more flexion at the hips. In fact, it is such an entirely different position to riding a road bike that I would recommend, if you could, going at a professional bike fit if you're going to be riding a TT, because you're in a very unique position for long periods of time. And if you can find someone who has some triathlon knowledge as well, because you obviously want to take into the fact that you're going to have to run off the bike having spent lots of hours in that position. I touched on it earlier, it's the amount of plantar and dorsiflexion at the ankle. So basically the angle that your ankle is at during the pedal stroke. So some people have their toes more pointed throughout the whole pedal stroke. If you're one of those people, then you're going to have your saddle height higher than that standard test we did earlier. If you do have your ankle very much at 90 degrees or close to that throughout the whole stroke, then the standard measurement is more likely to be closer for you. We've also got flexibility, especially at the hips. If you've got really tight hips, well, that can lead to back pain whilst you're cycling, and you might find adjusting your saddle height can help relieve that one. But if you do want more detail on that, then check out the video on sore back when cycling that Mark did very recently. Crank length is another factor to consider. We've discussed the height or the measurement from the middle of the bottom bracket to your saddle. Well, obviously the length of your crank is going to have an effect here, because the longer the crank, the further your foot will be when it's down at the 6 o'clock position, and the closer to you it will be when it's at the 12 o'clock position. So again, don't be too rigid with this measurement, and remember, if you do change your crank length for any reason, you're going to need to adjust your saddle height accordingly, and then the knock-on effect that that has on the rest of the chain. Now, I know it might feel like I've said a lot of what ifs and you need to think about this if it's that, but that's because we're all different. So there is no set, perfect recipe that's going to find all of us that wonderful desired saddle height. So it is a matter of starting with the basics and then going and experimenting, and hopefully you can find that correct saddle height for you. But if you're really struggling, then I would recommend getting professional help, because it isn't purely what's happening at the saddle, it's the whole chain you need to look at as well. But that's a video for another day. Hopefully you have enjoyed us. Give us a like, and remember, you can check out our social media channels and give those a follow too.